Hi everyone, welcome to Exploring the Quran and the Bible. I'm really excited to have Umar Lee with me to speak about Islam in America, his own story, Salafi Islam. Umar Lee is probably known to many of you. He's an author, a YouTuber, a journalist who works, covering questions of Islam in America, but also other things too, boxing and other things like MMA and also St. Louis. So Omar, how are you doing? Thank you for being here.
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a lifelong hater of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I have to tell you that before we start.
Well, I mean, I guess it's working.
And by the way,
Since 1988, since we won. Yeah, go ahead.
You can look up. I debated at Notre Dame professor E. Michael Jones. I don't know if you saw that, but E. Michael Jones was this rad trad Catholic at Notre Dame, and me and him debated. So this is my second podcast involving Notre Dame.
A domer. Oh, goodness. E. Michael Jones. I think I might have heard of that debate. I might have even watched it, but it would have been, what year? Do you know what year it was?
Yeah, that was 2020. That was 2020.
I think someone told me about it. I don't think I have ever met him, but
he's gone now. He's not at the university anymore because of his anti-Semitism and other things, but he was on faculty at Notre Dame.
Okay, how did the debate go? Did it get cantankerous?
If people can go to YouTube and look up Mike Tyson versus Marvis Frazier. So in that, I'm Mike Tyson, E. Michael Jones is Marvis Frazier, and that's about how it went. It was a one-sided beatdown.
Got it. Okay. I think I get the point. Yeah. Well, awesome to have you here. A lot of the stuff we do is kind of like we'll get into kind of the details of academic debates about the Quran or the Bible, but I'm really interested in questions of like lived Islam. As you probably know, I'm not a Muslim, but I really want to understand like not only, the beginnings of Islam and the Quran, but like Muslims around me. I mean, a lot of non-Muslim Americans still don't know much about Islam or even their Muslim neighbors. So yeah, this is a great opportunity for myself, but I think also for my viewers, but also get to know your story. So if it's okay, let's just start with that. First of all, there's a great interview you did with Tehran Pool on Skeps Islamica. We'll link to that interview in the description. And you go into some detail there about your story, but I mean, just briefly, could you summarize kind of your upbringing, including sort of religious background and your journey to Islam?
Well, I grew up in St. Louis, born and raised, family with deep ties to the city of St. Louis, and very blue collar, working class upbringing, typical kind of post 1960s American family dynamics of, divorced parents, et cetera, many of the things we've seen in our society. Grew up in a Southern Baptist home with my grandparents, my grandmother and my dad, and fell into juvenile delinquency, and I began reading a lot. The sport of wrestling was really the only thing keeping me out of too much trouble, but I began reading a lot. I was always a bookish kid. I was never a school kid, but I was always a bookish kid. Mm-hmm. And I read the autobiography of Malcolm X that piqued my curiosity in Islam. Then I got the Quran from the school library, my high school library. Mm-hmm. And then I went to the yellow pages to try to find a mosque. And then I saw an ad in a newspaper for introduction to Islam class, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about like the Baptist element of your family? Like, was religion a thing? I don't know, was your grandparents or your dad, like, I don't know, did you read the Bible? Did they talk to you about Jesus?
Yeah.
Do you remember going to services or anything? Like,
what was it like? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I was raised by my dad and his parents.
Okay.
So my dad was heavily in the church and went to church every week. So we'd go on Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, and Wednesdays. That was the old Southern Baptist way. Mm-hmm. They've kind of softened up in recent years, but historically the Southern Baptist, it was 3 times a week. And plus Sunday school, you don't just go to service, you go into Sunday school. So I grew up in Sunday school, Bellefontaine Baptist Church and First Baptist Church of Ferguson later on. And my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran of the 1st Marine Division, he didn't go to church, but his wife, my grandmother, was a staunch church lady.
Okay.
She would cook. She would always be cooking and singing the gospel songs, in the kitchen, just over in the glory land, and so I had a lot of church in my upbringing. I even went to, church camps some summers as a kid. We went to revivals. Saw some of the great evangelists like Bailey Smith. He would snap his fingers and then say, "You're just a heartbeat from hell," and you're gonna die and burn in the lake of fire. It was a fire and brimstone.
Right.
And I would contrast this because I think many people of my generation, and certainly the boomer converts, would have all grown up in the church.
Mm-hmm.
What you're seeing with the millennials and younger are people that grew up as nuns. They grew up with no
people convert
religion.
to Islam, right? Like converts to Islam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like these TikTok converts, the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them didn't have any kind of religious upbringing.
Right.
So for me, I already had a familiarity with the prophets, with the stories of the Bible. I mean, some of them were a little different in Islam, but we already had this general Abrahamic familiarity. And because we're Southern Baptists, no gambling, no drinking, all of those things, those were all not foreign or not strange to me, So, and if you look at the African American converts, who were most of the convert Muslims I was around, certainly in the 1990s and even today, most in that era would have come from at least a nominal church background, and some of them are very intense church background.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, in your like thinking about like your future, reflecting on learning about Islam, when you got the Quran from the school library, I mean, could you talk a little bit more, however much you feel comfortable, about like, sort of to what degree was there dissatisfaction with Christianity and the Bible? Or like, was it not really theology? Do you know what I mean? Like, did you ever have the thought like, wait, like I heard in church that like Jesus was both God and man, and that doesn't really make sense, or like God is Father, Son, and Spirit, that doesn't really make sense. Islam is like intellectually more appealing or attractive. Or was there like something else going on about just like the whole culture or vibe maybe of like the Christian Baptist, kind of world and stuff? Do you know what I mean?
I was thinking more the vibe aspect. So I do remember specifically Miss Martinez, but they pronounced it Martinez in St. Louis. Okay. And my Sunday school teacher was a very sweet lady, very dear lady that I have very fond memories of. But I remember asking her as a little kid, like, hey, this Trinity doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I do remember that it always was a little odd to me. And maybe we didn't have the people that could explain it correctly. Right. But more than theology, I actually think there's not that many people who convert due to theology. I think there's some.
Okay.
And you definitely have the theology nerds. Like, you'll see in Christianity now, like the kind of usually white guys, kind of theology nerds end up Orthodox Christian or something like that, right? But I think that's a small minority of people. What most people are looking for, including myself, were community and a vision and vibes. So for me, after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and you get the last chapter on the Hajj, and so many people converted after this. So it's not just my story, it's the story of many people.
Yeah.
You read this and you're saying, okay, these problems that divide America, race, and and I'm growing up in St. Louis, which is intensely racially divided, particularly North St. Louis County where I live. And you're saying Islam is kind of the pathway out of this. The Muslims have a better way of this universal brotherhood. This is what was taught in the autobiography. Now, in hindsight, you read Manny Marable's work, you read other things. Some of this is probably, as Abdurrahman Muhammad, the Malcolm X researcher says, it's the book we would write about ourselves, not necessarily the book. But it was very attractive to me in this context. And so the vibes of Islam was free of racism,
right, brotherhood.
and brotherhood, and politically militant.
Okay.
Because young people are attracted to militancy,
Whereas
are
in the
attracted to,
Baptist church was about personal salvation. It was kind of you and Jesus.
well, Baptist church is about personal salvation, but also, you know, what did Dr. King say? The most segregated place in America is Sunday morning. I forget, he said at noon or 10 a.m. or something like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, the Southern Baptist Church was created specifically, the convention, the Southern Baptist Convention was founded over slavery.
Yeah.
Or over segregation, not slavery, but over segregation as a segregated dom. Now, it wasn't segregated when I was growing up. You did see a handful of, you know, black congregants here and there, but the church was definitely racially divided. There was the Southern Baptist Church, and then there was the Missionary Baptist Church, and the National Baptist Church. St. Louis, there's more Missionary Baptist churches.
Okay.
And they're right down the street from each other. And you looked at the doors, one door, everyone's black. The other door, almost everyone is white, right? And so, and growing up in the 80s and at the tail end of the Cold War, the Reagan years, you know, and this is after the moral majority and Jerry Falwell and all that, the church had began to take on political vibes that was very pro-establishment. Whereas, you know, my reading and my analyzation and my life was leading me towards radicalism and militancy and things that were counter to the norms of the society.
Yeah. Okay, totally makes sense. And so what did I mean?
And I think this is the norm. I think this is why you see an influx of converts after 9/11. You see influx after 10/7, right? Now, will they stick around? Most of them no, but you do see these influxes.
Yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. And then, I mean, just to kind of complete the story a little bit, like what was your actual experience when you said you looked up in the yellow pages, found a mosque, like just the very beginning, like you know.
Funny story is,
yeah,
there was an ad for introduction to Islam class. So I go in and there's like a divider in the middle, not a divider, but like there's space in the middle and there's two sets of chairs. And the only people sitting there were two women. And I didn't know where to sit.
Okay.
And I said, I said, let me not be rude and let me sit next to these women.
Yeah.
You know. And they start mumbling to each other. And I immediately sensed maybe I did something wrong. Then a man who was a pillar of really a true pillar, a true servant of the St. Louis Muslim community, Dr. Wahid Rana, who died a few years ago, who was a professor at St. Louis University, who was everything: halal butcher, marrier, funerals, imam, consular, chaplain, everything. Dr. Rana came in, and Dr. Rana just put his hand on my shoulder, said, "Hey, come sit with me, brother." That was it, you know. So I came to sit with him. The shocking thing, I guess, for me is, and I've talked to a few friends about this, is you have this idea of Islam from reading Malcolm, et cetera, and you're expecting to go to the mosque and find, you know, political militants and people who are very politically and socially conscious, right, and a heavily African-American crowd. And I'm a guy who, in my era growing up in St. Louis, it was very seldom you would meet someone who wasn't black or white. There was a handful of Asian kids, maybe their parents owned, like, you know, carry-outs and stuff like that, and a handful of Hispanic kids who were turned white. So the Hispanic kids I went to school with identified as white, you know, so we just had this staunch, you know, black-white division. And you go into the mosque, and for the first time in my life, I was hearing, once people started showing up, I was hearing all these accents. People from Saudi Arabia, there was a lot of Saudi students at the time, Pakistan, Bangladesh. The guy who gave me my shahada, Dr. Modur Rahman from Bangladesh, Nigeria. I mean, just really like United Nations. So I was really kind of just overwhelmed, like, wow, you know, just, it wasn't what I was expecting, it was something totally different. But I ended up getting hooked up with a group of African-American brothers who I'm still friends with to this day, that had what they called the Monday night class, which we still have the class. Okay. This is like 32 years later, 33 years later, the Monday night class, the brotherhood class. So I ended up getting hooked up with that crowd at the mosque. they were older. They were like my dad's age, and some of them even older, but they were of more of a similar background, older African American guys. So those became my mentors in the
not
deen.
not the immigrant community. And do you remember when you first heard the word Salafi and like where you were, and then kind of like how you began to understand that there is something called like the Salafis?
I don't remember where I first heard the word, to be honest with you, but Imams, I think it's Imam Zayd Shakir has this saying, or maybe someone in the circle says, most American Muslim and most African American Muslims are Salafi without even knowing it.
Okay.
So we were being taught from books printed in Saudi Arabia and Salafi things, but we were not identifying. We were not identifying as Salafi. We didn't necessarily hear the word Salafi, but we would get books, Al-Albani, Ibn Baz, etc. I first really became conscious of a movement called Salafi. Probably, if I have to identify it, is visiting Ismail Royer, who was a student at American University in Washington, D.C. And Ismail's from St. Louis, too. I was there at his Shahada. I was the first person he saw when he walked into the mosque the first time. Yeah.
Okay.
And Ismail walked into the mosque with dreadlocks and this Arabic tattoo. And it was me and a guy named Ben sitting on the bench. And Ismail says, "Hey, man, what does Islam say about revolution?" That was his first question. So I went to took a Greyhound bus to go visit him. And I kind of got the layout of the DMV Muslim community and the East Coast Muslim community up to New York and Jersey and Philly. And the Salafi movement was very strong, very powerful. They opened the Mahad in Northern Virginia, which was a 4-year college free of tuition.
Okay.
The African American Muslims in New York, Philly, Jersey were becoming very prominent, and they had a place called Jamaat al-Qawi in DC, which is now the 18th and Monroe Mosque. I believe it's called Masjid Quran wal Hadith. And so I became aware of this movement on the East Coast. And unlike St. Louis, there were a lot of young Muslims, a lot of young Black American Muslims. And it was energetic. And they had that kind of that hip East Coast vibe and swagger, And so it was something totally different than going back to St. Louis, and it was kind of, it seemed lame when I'd go back to St. Louis. I couldn't wait to get back to the East Coast.
So
but just so happened, Sheikh Ali
Ismail is from the East Coast and then came out to St. Louis, took Shahada.
No, he's from St. Louis.
Okay, but then he moved out there sort of before you, or?
Yeah, he went to college at American University. That's how he went out there.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that's how he. Yeah. So he went to college. He did his first 2 years of community college here in St. Louis, and then he went to AU.
Got it.
And then he went abroad. But so but it just so happened also because at the time I was back and forth to the East Coast, because when I seen the East Coast, I didn't want nothing else, because that's where all the action was. Like there was nothing going on in St. Louis.
St. Louis seems sleepy, like people are doing their prayers and reading on, but there's action going on.
Nothing exciting.
The capital area,
yeah, nothing exciting. Because once you're on the East Coast, if you hear about an event in Philly, bam, you can pop up in Philly. If you hear about something in Jersey, boom. Hear about something in Brooklyn, boom. I mean, once you're on the East Coast, you can essentially take the bus or train in between all these places. So it just so happened though that Sheikh Ali Tamimi, his brother Zayd, moved to St. Louis. So Zayd, even though we had Sheikh Abdurrahman Basir by that time in St. Louis, the Sheikh was one of those not Salafi, but essentially teaching Salafiyah. But if you would ask him about the Salafi movement, he didn't like it. He
thought they were Abdurrahman Bashir.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. He was an African American, also an political activist, right?
Yes. He had the background of a political activist, Black Power movement, street guy from Brooklyn, becomes Muslim and becomes a leader of Black Muslim communities in the Midwest for decades until his passing a few years ago. And
Was
Missouri,
his
Kansas,
hesitancy
Oklahoma.
with Salafism, sorry to jump in, Omar, but was, I mean, as much as far as you know, was his hesitancy with Salafism that, sort of the most important principle or cause for him was sort of civil rights, the fight for civil rights, and Black
No,
America, and Salafism was too associated with Saudi?
I don't know. I think it's more complex than that, because if you look at what the Sheikh taught, he taught a very conservative, essentially Salafi, no bid'ah, staunch sunnah, like even wanted people sleeping on the floor.
Okay.
I mean, a little tablighi Jamaat things mixed in, that we should all wear sunnah style clothes.
So there
So
were
he had
religious
that.
ideas there, yeah. Yeah.
But he also was political in the Islamic sense. Like Ali Tamimi used to say, when I say politics, I may mean one thing and you may think another thing. I'm not talking about the Democratic and Republican Party. That's what Ali Tamimi used to say.
Yeah.
So Sheikh Rahman was never apolitical. He was detached, obviously didn't vote, didn't participate in American politics. He used to say the people are trying to change and the people are the problem. So so he was like Jamil Al-Amin. Now there's this young generation of activists who don't know Jamil Al-Amin. They're only writing about him and tweeting about his case. Jamil was someone who rejected his prior politics. Yes, he had a background in the Black Panthers and SNCC, etc., but he explicitly makes it clear he rejected that politics. He rejected the politics of the left in favor of an Islamic-based political paradigm. Mm-hmm. And that was the name of Sheikh Rahman. Mm-hmm. What he essentially saw is the quote-unquote immigrant Muslim community essentially as sellouts, essentially as people who migrated to the United States for money, to make money, for economic reasons, and did not prioritize their deen, did not prioritize religion. And so there was always this friction, and he would beef with people. I remember he gave a khutbah one time, what did you come to America for? Your green card? Did you get your green card, brothers? So he was kind of staunch, but he also had very loving and close relationships with a lot of, quote unquote immigrant brothers.
Yeah. So I say quote unquote, not to generalize and just assume that right, there's this kind of division within a mosque community like in St. Louis. But I mean, nevertheless, I mean, we can get into this later too, but like around, for example, Abdurrahman Bashir, was he taken seriously by, say, the Arab or Pakistani Muslims in the community? Was there any sort of feeling that, well, I mean, this guy, he's an American, maybe his Arabic isn't 100% or whatever. So he's like, in terms of the deen, the religion, like, we won't take him too seriously.
There was some of both. Okay. There were, he had some sponsors, South Asian and Arabs who were very fond of him and supported him, and doctors who treated him, for free of charge. So he had some people that were very supportive, because they essentially looked from the 70s until until his passing. We passed away in Detroit, and 2 or 3 years ago, he was dedicated to Dawah. Mm-hmm. And he used to say, I come to the bush for the Bushmen. I specialize in Dawah to the gangbanger. So he was making Dawah in the streets. Whatever city he go to, he would find out the roughest neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. That's where he wanted to go. That's where he wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And it was a Dawah also that was attractive in the streets. That was a reason Islam was attractive in prison a lot of times. Mm-hmm. Because he said Islam is a movement. You got to get up and move. That was one of his things. Mm. But also that the Muslims fear nothing but Allah. The Muslim isn't a punk. The Muslim isn't a chump. So we would go in the neighborhoods with no fear. That we were ready for whatever. This, guns, whatever. We were ready. So it was a totally different ethos than the assimilating middle to upper class.
Yeah, 100%.
Suburban doctor STEM vibe. So it was in contrast at times. It was definitely and there was, I remember in Wichita, the Sheikh Amin, who was imam at the time, says, this guy's just calling himself a sheikh. He's not really a sheikh. So there was definitely that vibe. But I would counter that this is a man who taught people that could not read English properly. He had to teach them English properly so that they could learn how to read Quran. He's teaching high school dropouts, felons, people from the street to read Quran, to explore these complex ideas, a fiqh, etc. What he did, they couldn't do. And what they do, he couldn't do. So it's really, kind of complementary.
So for you, Omar, it seems, like just kind of, learning about your story, it seems like there's kind of two different models at this time in your life. There are kind of two different models there for you. There's Abdurrahman Bashir, African-American activist, sort of like very powerful kind of way of speaking about Islam, doing dawah, all of that. And then, you mentioned for us already Zayd Tamimi. I don't know much about Zayd. I know a little bit. I guess his brother is Ali Tamimi, who's well known because the court case around him. But I think I know Ali was an intellectual, right? Something in the sciences, did a PhD.
Yeah, he was very intellectual.
Very much more sort of intellectual kind of model. So how did you kind of like experience those sort of two sort of examples before?
Zayd was the opposite.
Okay.
The sheikh is a street guy. He would tell you, I'm a street guy. And he would pepper stories about the Sahaba and about the Prophet. And he would always come back, in Brooklyn back in the day, if you were on Knickerbocker Avenue, and it was, he would pepper everything with these old street stories, what I'm saying, and Broadway and Myrtle and all these intersections, but Zayd was, a suburban guy. Made a lot of money.
Family was born in the U.S. Maybe their parents are from Iraq. Yeah. Is that right? From Iraq?
Parents from Iraq. They went to high school in Saudi Arabia, middle school and high school. They're actually personally tutored by Bilal Phillips. So they were they spoke Arabic with an accent. They didn't speak perfect Arabic.
Right.
And they both made a lot of money. They both were very successful in their careers.
Okay.
So, but Zayd comes to St. Louis, his teaching style is totally different. He is explicitly promoting the Salafi Dawah. He begins to work with the local Saudi students who had a small mosque called Masjid Zaytuna at the time, because the Saudi government used to pay for them to open musallas. And he gets them essentially to coordinate with him on Dawah efforts, to have a cassette tape library for American Muslim converts, to have a book library, to disseminate books and information. And he began teaching classes where you start to learn, Athari, Aqidah, and et cetera. And so the way that Sheikh Ali and his brother Zayd would teach the Salafi Dawah, and Zayd used to say, "My dear brother." He said, I don't even say brother, I would say my dear brother. I could never just say brother. He said, because my brother is a man. We're speaking about Ali.
Yeah.
Say it's my brother is someone who instills Tawheed and Islamic knowledge in people. Trying to say, so I can't even mention his name without honoring what he does, et cetera, et cetera. So he was extremely fond of his brother. And so his style was totally different, but they were also different than the contentious Salafis.
Okay.
We had this, these like Spubs crowd and Troy crowd that were concentrated on, and they were mostly on the internet, which I wasn't on a lot at the time. They were mostly concentrated on divisive arguments and putting people on and off the minhaj and attacking Muslims, and Zayd and Ali had kind of already done that, like in the 80s, and kind of grown out of that, so they were not that interested in these divisive issues vis-a-vis with other Salafis. But when I would interact on the East Coast, particularly with the African-American Salafis around the, Abu Muslim or Abu Osama Dawud Adib, in these circles around them, they were very much attached to kind of this Troy narrative of who's a deviant, who's on it, who's off it.
I don't know that term.
And they
You
were
referred to
totally
something.
apolitical.
Maybe I should know it. You said Troy narrative.
Troy was like this website based out of Toronto. I can't remember what Troy stood for,
Okay.
but they would post articles.
Salafi
This
website.
is a deviant. This is a BD. I mean, the most caricature of Salafi. So and so is a deviant. So and so is a Sufi. Matter of fact, when I got to Toronto, and I caught a Greyhound bus up there from Detroit, I was at a bus stop. I'm a Muslim, and I said, "Yeah, I was just in New York and DC." He said, "DC, that's where that Idris Palmer is. He's a Sufi. He's a rabid Sufi." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I know Idris personally. He's not a Sufi. I mean, Idris is like very hardcore Salafi. He's not." He's like, "No, no, no, no," and he was convinced.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, "Have you ever met Idris Palmer?" He said,
"No." Where are
"No."
you getting your information?
Where are you getting your information from? so that was kind of what what was going on at that time. So I was getting different things, I had different influences.
Yeah. So I mean, just generally about like in your book, your 2014 book, The Rise and Fall of the Salafi Dawah in America. I mean, you do describe like going to different conferences and things. I mean, we've already spoken a bit. We probably need a whole nother episode to like go into greater depth about your story. But I mean, one thing that interested me in your book, which I highly recommend, by the way, you can get it, through that big book website, download it there. Yeah, in The Rise and Fall of the Salafi Dawah in America, you speak about like going to conferences, and I don't know how early this was in your journey as a Muslim, but like at these Salafi conferences, as opposed to some of the, I mean, maybe bigger kind of mainstream Sunni conferences, just kind of an excitement, like that, like, a lot of the ladies are in niqab, guys with big beards. I mean, just a general sense that like we're taking this seriously, like we actually, we respect the deen, we fear God, all this. I mean, does that kind of describe like sort of like what were you feeling at the time, that like the Salafis are a place where we take things seriously, and not that like people that go to the ISNA or ICNA conferences are sellouts, but it's just not like the real thing. It's not like the pure.
Well, there's some more to that.
Okay.
Remember, I'm from St. Louis.
Okay.
At that time, you would never see a Muslim unless you went to the masjid.
Okay.
Like now, if you
like
drive around,
big crowds of Muslims, like just that much was
yeah. Like now, if you drive around St. Louis, you will see a Muslim here and there. You will see a hijab here and there. Just driving around St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't see that at that time. So you went from an environment and not seeing any Muslims to a crowd of thousands of Muslims. Not just a crowd of thousands of Muslims. Right. Not just a crowd of thousands of Muslims, but a crowd of Muslims who are like you, that were born and raised in the United States, that laugh at the same things you laugh at.
Okay.
That probably watch the same sports that you watch,
right.
That have the same cultural references that you have, probably come from similar family dynamics you have. Obviously, I'm in a minority situation in that environment, and it's a vast majority African American, but still much closer to my upbringing than anything. ISNA, there are more people, but it's a crowd that the vast majority are South Asian. So there's always this, not that you don't have friendships, because I have some very deep friendships, with South Asian and Arab and Malaysian and everybody else. But there's there's this sense like, this is I'm coming to visit their event. You see what I'm saying?
I totally get what you're saying.
But this is our event. And this is also in a place like St. Louis, most Muslim converts, men, have struggled to find wives because there's not a lot of Muslim women here.
Right.
So a lot of these brothers from the Midwest and the South.
And was it, sorry, just to jump in on that point, like was the sort of nasiha, the sort of advice or counsel you got was you really shouldn't marry a Christian girl. You should marry Muslim.
100%. So in St. Louis, the older crowd, like that tend to go to the Imam Warthadi Muhammad affiliated masjid, many of them had married Christians. And many of the early Muslim immigrants from Pakistan and Arab countries had married Christians. But by the time I came along, the focus was on the married Muslims. Problem in St. Louis is there's no Muslim women to marry. So these conventions are visiting places like Philadelphia became a place where you could meet a Muslim women.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other option, people started going to Morocco because the word got out that Moroccans were open to marrying Americans. So a lot of people, not just in St. Louis, but throughout the country, and I recommend some academic. I mean, you have academics of American Islam writing books about very boring topics.
Yeah.
But two topics you can write about is Islam becoming mainstream in Philadelphia, number one, right? I mean, if 20 Muslim yuppies start a third space in the suburbs of Cleveland, it'll get a book. But Islam becoming mainstream in the city of Philadelphia doesn't get a book because Black, working class, too theologically conservative.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the Moroccan thing. This is a very interesting phenomenon. It's so many, and now their kids are grown, and their kids are teenagers, and their kids have kids. There's this whole generation of Black Muslim / Moroccan marriages. And I really think some academic needs to take a look at it as a book.
Yes, that one country.
So, we don't need any more Muslim yuppie books. We're exhausted on that. So
connected to the Morocco bit. I mean, it's kind of a different topic. It's really just kind of superficially related, but I don't know. It came into my mind. You hear sometimes about the idea of Hijra, right? And that this is kind of a Salafi thing. I mean, the whole topic is complicated because there's questions, debates among jurisprudence about living as a minority in a non-Muslim society generally. But in the Salafi world, how many people were saying it's just not okay to carry out your life as a Muslim in a place of kufr, where you can't fully live as a Muslim. You don't hear that then the laws that you have to follow are imposed upon you by this democratic system, which doesn't have, Sharia as its origin. So you hear this kind of chat a lot. And were there guys or ladies or families? I mean, I know there were some, obviously, but was it a significant idea out there that you really should think of going to Saudi, Turkey, maybe Morocco?
Not Turkey.
Okay.
Yes, it was a very significant idea, and a lot of people went. You got to remember, you're talking about a small community, so a rather large amount for a small community went. And so, if you want to start out, even before I entered the scene, Sudan became very popular.
Okay.
Because you have the interests of Hassan al-Turabi and Omar Bashir, who were promoting an Islamic style government. But I think that the living was just
really
too rough.
Guy, but anyway, another topic. Very fascinating.
The living was just too rough. And so the thing in the 90s became get a job in the Gulf teaching Arabic. And the irony is more Muslim women had college degrees than men.
Wait, you mean teaching English in the Gulf?
Teaching English.
Yeah.
Teaching English in the Gulf.
Yeah.
So they could get those jobs. So that was one path where men, Muslim brothers or sisters, could get jobs over there. But statistically, more women had college degrees. So they were able to go over there, take their families, and teach English. Egypt was another option because you had places like the Fajr Center teaching teaching Arabic. So if you wanted to go and study the language, you can go to Egypt. And then you had, depending on your Salafi or Sufi, the Salafis would go to Yemen with Sheikh Mukbil. And then you had Sufis would go to Hijra. So they had a big Sufi thing in Hijra. So the Gulf, Yemen, I mean, technically part of the Gulf, but, sociologically, I guess you had to split it, and economically. And then Egypt, those were the spots.
Okay.
Turkey was not on the Muslim radar until much later, with the rise of Erdogan and neo-Ottomanism, etc.
Were there debates between people where some folks were like, no, listen, this is a place to do dawah, we can build Islam in America, this is sort of a good thing, and others were like, no, it's just more important to be in a Muslim environment, think about you and your family, do Hijra.
Yeah, so there were those debates, people saying, look, if you raise your kids here, they'll be upon kufr. There's no way they can stay Muslim in a society. Mm-hmm. And we are Islamically obligated to live in Muslim lands. Some people say it was even wajib to live in Muslim lands. I have a friend of mine right now. He's a quote unquote illegal immigrant in Saudi Arabia, there with no status because he won't come back to the U.S.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you know
So,
Asim and Hakim. Do you know this sheikh in Saudi,
yes,
Asim Hakim?
yeah,
So he
yeah,
just,
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
just
I
saw on
know.
Twitter, I don't think he used the
Yeah,
word wajib, it was in English, but he basically said, you cannot be living in Darakuf. You've got to come to an Islamic country.
yeah. So the problem is that it almost never works because, like myself, not college educated, and the vast majority of the people in the Salafi Dawah movement, um, in the convert sense, was mostly African American, were people without college degrees. There were some, but generally that Dawah was not attractive to a college educated crowd. So these are people on the economic margins largely of American society.
Okay.
And many had managed to find decent jobs in the United States, working in hospitals or maybe working government jobs or et cetera, quit those jobs to make Hijra, quote unquote, which worsened their economic situation. Uh, Many of them experienced health issues. Their kids usually came back warped, strange, not at home in the United States society, but they were never going to get a passport, a citizenship of these countries.
Right,
It's not Hijra.
right.
It's Hijra, maybe. Maybe you can say it's Hijra if you go to Egypt and they give you an Egyptian passport. Or if you're just visiting.
Yeah,
You're a visitor.
yeah.
So I remember I had a friend of mine years ago. He went to the Yemeni embassy, and I told him, I said, whatever you tell them, don't tell them you want to make Hijra. Just say you want to visit historic sites. So he comes in wearing a turban, thobe. He walks right in and he says, I want to make Hijra to get away from these kuffar. And the secretary says, well, we're not giving visas at this time, but we're going to get some kind of political answer. So we leave. And I said, look, man, you ain't do what I tell you. You got to play it cool. I just happen to know somebody that works at the embassy. I called him up. Everything in the Middle East is Western, right? It's connections. So I called him. He said, look, I'll take care of it, but tell him don't say anything stupid. Went back in. She said, okay, we'll give you the visa. It's for him and his, I think, 2 or 3 kids. And he said, it'll be $320. He says, well, I only have $70. So we left there. We went to the Saudi Embassy Islamic Affairs Division. I was wearing a hat. I literally took my hat off. We passed the hat to get the money for his visa. And we got it.
From the Saudis.
And me and a brother, it was me and a brother from the Bronx, Abu Hudayfa. And Abu Hudayfa, man, I love that brother. He was a real character, real New York guy. And so me and Abu Hudayfa sat there and talked to him like, look, man, how are you going to make Hijra? He said, I got the plane tickets. Okay, how are you going to eat when you get there? How are you going to survive? You have children with you. How are your children going to survive? He said, oh, the Muslims are going to take care of us. And man, the Muslims are not taking care of the people there already. They don't want any new poor people. They're not taking care of the poor people that are already in Yemen. So we ended up collecting some funds for him, largely because of his kids, right? And I told him, I said, man, you got to be very careful. You always want a return ticket in case there's an illness, in case one of your kids gets sick. Well, he was back like in 6 months because one of his kids got sick. Yeah. And he told me with a straight face, he's like, you'll never believe what happened. My kid got sick and we had to get a ticket from the United States Embassy. And I'm like, yeah, of course I believe what happened. I told you that there's a possibility that this would happen. So for a lot of people, for me, the pull of Hijra was not that deep because I love to travel. I still, I travel internationally. I try to do once or twice a year because I just love to see the world. And, I had a great international trip in September and I got another one coming up in October.
So, I mean, these cases, if I can jump in, we've been speaking about like people for religious reasons, I can understand like, even as a non-Muslim, why there'd be an attraction, being an Islamic country, etc. And then I assume you would probably say like the cases of, presumably less of folks who want to go over and fight basically as mercenaries, know, it's
Much,
kind of
much
a whole
smaller.
nother
Much, much
thing,
smaller.
right?
Yeah.
Obviously, it comes in with the story of Ali Tamimi. I don't know if you want to get involved in that or if you feel like it's better just left to the side, whatever you think is best.
That's a whole,
Yeah, yeah. Could you
yeah,
speak
that's a
about that?
whole
Like, was there
nother,
chatter going on already? Obviously, there's the Afghanistan thing going on already. I mean, first in the 80s, but it sort of carries on afterwards in the
yeah.
90s. And then there's other causes too, right? Like
Mhm.
some people just kind of have a long list of like, where is the Ummah being
Chechnya,
attacked?
Chechnya, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
Well,
could
you
you
got to understand
discuss that?
about the Salafi movement in the United States. What you got to understand about the Salafi movement in the United States is that, unlike the UK, the vast majority of the particularly the Black Salafi movement in the United States is apolitical,
Mhm.
is attached to Sheikh Rabia al-Madkhali in Saudi Arabia. So these are people that would never go overseas for any kind of political motivations or jihad or something of that
Okay,
nature.
okay.
So we don't have the same ingredients that you have in the UK, where most of the Salafis in the UK are those who are not quietists. So here we have quietist
Yeah,
Salafis are the dominant group,
more
and
Salafi
then in the
jihadis in
UK
the
you
UK.
have the like Saudis or more politically minded Salafis. So we have different dynamics. The crowd around Sheikh Ali Tamimi, who ended up, Ismail and all the brothers that got in trouble, Saifullah Chapman and Ibrahim Hamdi and brother Hamad, friends of mine, who ended up getting in trouble. They got in trouble. They were a minority. They were just a very small minority within the greater scheme of things. And also, from what I have, because in the 80s in the Afghan campaign, you did have Black Salafis go out of Jamaat al-Qawi in DC, and you did have Black Sufis go with the Fuqara Jamaat of Sheikh Jalani. So one of my imams, Mujahid Abdul Qadir Manepta, he did go in the 80s. But what I have noticed, and particularly if you go up to the current times, this seems to be this notion of going overseas and fighting, or this obsession with international politics
Mhm.
vis-a-vis the Muslim world, tends to be something that white converts are more
Interesting.
focused on.
Interesting.
I give you an example. When I go to my brotherhood class, or when I go around groups of African American Muslims, I hear it a little bit, but I don't hear much about Palestine. And you can go to Juma and not hear about Palestine, and you can go to your classes and not hear about Palestine. Occasionally you will hear about it, but most of the times you won't. Not to say people are not sympathetic, but it's just not this
Mhm.
issue that dominates the room. If you have a white convert today, the prototypical white convert may be walking around with a
Mhm.
Palestinian lapel, a kifaya,
Yeah, yeah.
this obsession with the Palestinian issue. There's a racial division here. I think white Muslims are much more prone to be attracted to these international movements. We saw this with ISIS, we saw this with other things, and I think Black Americans are much less prone to that way of thinking.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Okay, I'm gonna refrain from
Yeah,
speculating. I have like
yeah,
different ideas going around my head,
yeah.
like maybe it's because of this or that, but that's a really interesting observation. Maybe that could be a good segue to speak a
Well,
little bit.
I'll tell you one thing. We had City Hall Iftar this year in St. Louis,
Okay,
and the crowd was like 95% African American. Usually it's like 40 to 50% African American.
okay,
Uh, a Palestinian activist that got people to boycott it
okay,
because of what's going on in Palestine,
okay.
even though the city of St. Louis has no role in the conflict.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, what role does St. Louis play in the conflict? I can't figure one out.
yeah.
But she said we must boycott it. And so I talked to one of the African American organizers there, and he said, quite frankly, he said, if we had to cancel events because tragedy, Black folks would never have any event.
Yeah.
So that was his
Yeah.
that was his take of it.
I mean, that's actually a really profound statement, right? Like, because it gets at,
Yeah,
yeah, the African
yeah,
American Muslim experience and questions of where is the attention of maybe white Muslim converts. And I mean, the
yeah,
scene
yeah.
is really complicated for me as an outsider to try to understand the scene of American Islam today. So sort of fast forwarding, to the scene of Islam today is really complicated. I mean, I heard your interview with Taryn, which was great, and I read your book, which 2014. So a lot has happened since 2014.
He's one of my heroes
Yeah.
because I'm an American that's always wanted to live abroad, not in poverty in the mountains of Yemen. It depends where my iman is and where my life is.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think about Dominican Republic or Brazil, but also I have I have a fondness for the UK. I have a real fondness. So it
Because
was
of
a
the
real
British
pleasure
boxers? Is it the
visiting
British
him.
boxers?
I love cricket. I love boxing. I love soccer. I love British history. I think that I think British history, largely due to people in your profession, I would say the academics. I think that British history gets unfairly tarnished as negative. I think what's going on in the academy now is if you teach Islamic history, or if you may have some constraints to fall within political correctness, to fall into some kind of DEI framework that Muslims are very lovely people and very and instead of telling that yes, Muslims are lovely, but all people are complex and all histories are complex, and slavery was not uniquely Western, or slavery was not uniquely British or French or American, that all people throughout the world were involved in slavery, and all people were conquerors. Why do people in Morocco speak Arabic? Why do people in the Indian subcontinent have Arabic names? So there's all these complexities that are not touched on. So I think the British are the fall guy, but
Yeah.
I really think if you
Like in
go
the
in
movies where all the
history,
bad guys have British accents, even in Star Wars.
the British accent. Yes. If you go into history, the British Empire, I think, has been overall a force for good. Complex, certainly have erred, certainly have many sins as everyone does. But if you look at the whole picture, I think you'll find that. And if you look, when the United States were twiddling our thumbs in 1940, when we had a significant percentage of the American population that did not want to get involved in the war in Europe, that it was one island alone that was standing
up
by themselves against so I along with the Russians, but they were the bad guys. So there you go.
Yeah. I
After
mean, I wish I could speak intelligent about World War II, but obviously even the Soviets at the beginning, they
yeah,
made some sort of pact with the Nazis, right? Non-aggression pact or something like that.
right.
So
Ribbentrop Pact, yeah.
yeah. I mean, just with Islam today in the US,
Yeah.
I'll let maybe if you speak with Taryn again and speak more about Islam in the UK, because it sounds from your back and forth that it's like a really, really different scene. I've had a couple of British Muslims speak to me on YouTube, but they're academics, so it's like you're not really getting the whole picture.
But I will say this: the British have some very good academic studying Islam.
Right.
Very good.
Yeah.
I would say they have a lot better work coming out than the US. Not that there's not good stuff here, because there is, but the British academics are not afraid to go into working class communities, are not afraid to go into Salafi communities, etc. Whereas here, you have a class bias from many. You have a race bias and a theology bias, and there's this pressure in the U.S. to promote Islam as a progressive, upwardly mobile suburban minority.
All right, so let me ask you kind of the most difficult question about American Islam, which kind of like continues that kind of train of thought. I mean, I've heard people say that there's kind of a conspiracy between, I mean, conspiracy is probably too harsh a word, but like, leftists, mostly white, kind of intellectuals, kind of woke, the woke crowd, sort of cooperate with certain brand of American Muslim. And, they want to say like, this is the true Islam. It's definitely not the Salafis.
Right.
It's, the more sort of politically engaged kind of, I don't want to name names, maybe you will. But do you know what I mean? Like that this is all like a sham, that's like a deception that's being sort of hoisted on the American public, that, the leftist, non-Muslim, woke, liberal is sort of cooperating with a certain brand of Islam, and they're helping each other out, but it's not giving you the full story. What do you think about that?
Well, you have to realize that the white right has often been a wolf, and the white left has often been a serpent. So there's the same goal, but a different methodology a lot of times. We can go back to Ferguson 2014. You saw a grassroots uprising in the Black community that in excess of 90% of the people you saw on the street in the early days were working class Black men. Okay. It was a real feeling of love in the streets of St. Louis. Then the professional activists, Ford Foundation, Open Society, all these NGOs start showing up. Then they start picking the activists they want to promote, who were statistically either women or LGBT.
Okay. Okay.
And they wanted to promote a narrative of intersectionality. So they created this fake myth, Ferguson to Palestine, which was really based on one or two people. The vast majority of people on the streets could care less about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The greater involvement Palestinians had in Ferguson was that statistically they owned a lot of the stores that were being burned and looted.
Okay.
So, but due to this academic and foundation connection with the media, particularly public media and publishing, they're able to create this narrative that Ferguson was about intersectionality and Ferguson to Palestine, etc. That was money talking, and this creative, intellectual, political, nonprofit, industrial complex class. And you can see they've done the same in the Muslim community. Is if you take away their non-Muslim money, the progressive Muslim movement collapses like a house of cards because there's no organic grassroots support for it. There's no support for it other than what's given to them from academic institutions, from nonprofits, Planned Parenthood or a Ford Foundation. It's entirely existing because of money from outside of the Muslim community.
I mean, I
And
wonder if academia plays in a role in that too, because if you go to academic conferences like the American Academy of Religion, in the Islam section, has a reputation for, being very progressive politically, sort of arm in arm with other people that have
so
similar
the Muslim
beliefs.
community itself is not a progressive community. The average mosque is more conservative than the most conservative church. A Southern Baptist would be a flaming liberal compared to your average mosque. But the money and support is from progressive organization institutions to create this Muslim identity. Where Islam doesn't play a factor, it's the Muslim identity, where someone can be a 100% proud and unapologetic Muslim, but not be the least bit religious, because they're defining Muslim as a political identity guided by progressive politics. Okay, I give you a story. I know a Muslim woman, a woman from a Muslim family who's an atheist. Then it came out they were giving grants in her state for Muslim women activists. She turned Muslim again to get the grant. So it's there's a lot of funny stuff. So what you're seeing now, though, and 10/7 kind of disturbed this. What we were seeing was a turn back to the right by Muslims. Muslims rallying across the country at school boards, Muslim parents at school boards throughout the country. Trump picked up a lot of Muslim votes.
Trans agenda or issues like that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, gender ideology, etc. So 2016. Trump did gain in the Muslim vote. And there was anticipation he may get up to 40, 50% of the vote in 2024. then you have 10-7, which creates its whole set of dynamics. It just upsets everything. So Biden will probably not get the majority, right? Trump will probably get more Muslim votes, but I don't know if he's actually gained that much, or people are just going to stay at home, or a segment going to look at third-party options, et cetera. But there is, and it's gendered, particularly among Muslim men, there's this blowback and pushback against progressive politics in the Muslim community, and the movement tends to be led by women, and so there is kind of these gender dynamics
really
in the Muslim community. And you're seeing it in some other communities too, in the Black community as well.
Yeah. So I want to ask about two sort of ways that non-Muslim Americans often speak about Islam, and you can sort of assess like the degree of authenticity of this way of, or it's just 100% caricature. One, when I give talks to mostly non-Muslim audiences, like I go around sometimes to give talks to Notre Dame alumni in different cities and things, and obviously it's a very particular demographic. It tends to be the older crowd that goes to those kind of talks anyway. But every once in a while, someone will come up and be like, you kind of look around the room, and he'll be like, you guys don't know this, but there's this Islamic concept called taqiyya. And, what it means is that Muslims hide the real agenda. They're pretending to be like for democracy, for human rights and all this, but they're just biding their time, until they can take over. So that's one issue you hear a lot. And then another issue you hear a lot from non-Muslims is that obviously that's not what taqiyya is, mostly a Shiite thing and stuff. So we can even forget the real meaning of taqiyya. But then the other thing is, it's all Saudi money, maybe Qatari money that's behind all of these Muslim movements. Like Saudis and the Qataris, all they care about is building mosques and printing English translation of the Quran so they can Islamize America. And it's all like, the foreign influence is actually controlling things. Take that away, and Islam will sort of disappear. So what do you think about those two ideas out there?
Well, that's a very illogical and dated argument, because Saudi money has not been in the U.S. Muslim community for 22 years. Okay. If you go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, yes, Saudis were spending a lot of money on Dawah in the U.S. and building mosques, but they haven't spent anything in the last 22 years. They've completely pulled out. The only thing the Saudis do now is, as far as Islam in America, is do Hajj and Umrah visas.
Okay.
And MBS is, a secularizing force to some extent in Saudi Arabia. They have a different, matter of fact, they even have, Saudis even have some people that had monitored, what they define as Muslim extremism that are on payroll of Saudi organizations now.
So maybe,
Yeah. So so Saudis are not involved at all. Qataris, yes, they have Ikhwani ideology, which they are helping to promote, which is kind of involved in this Ikhwani left alliance in America, particularly in American campuses. When I look at campus protests now, I'm very happy I didn't go to college. Maybe I would have came out as nutty as some of these protesters. But if you look at Al Jazeera, it's kind of funny. It's like they actually do some really good reporting in English, right? But they're woke in English, Ikhwani in Arabic. They have this, differential, and they're hoping that the Western progressive is stupid. The Western progressive is stupid. I'll grant them that. So they probably won't pick up on that. But so they have this odd game. But no, Islam will exist with no Qatari funding, with no Saudi funding, with no government funding for anyone, because as Muslims move to America, Muslims tend to be economically successful. Why are Muslims economically successful? Muslims, the American Enterprise Institute, you can look at it, has something called the success sequence. You grow up in a two-parent household, you go to college, you graduate, you defer children to after getting married. It's called the success sequence.
Okay.
You can look it up on the American Enterprise Institute website. The vast majority of Muslims and nearly all immigrant Muslims follow the success sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, once they assimilate, the funny thing is you have a lot of these, particularly Muslim women, they will speak against colonialism and all these things, but they're kissing a dog, or they have a dog in their profile picture. So they are culturally assimilating into American whiteness while speaking of neocolonialism. So this may be them acting out some kind of psychological issues they have within themselves. The biggest colonialists you'll see are the people on the left who are cultural colonialists, but they are the Muslims follow the success sequence. So Muslims are successful, and Muslims tend to have good majors, not poetry majors or Russian literature majors.
When they go to college,
they tend to have majors
something practical.
When they go to college.
Yeah,
something practical, STEM, business, law, and staying away from the normative American lifestyle. Now Ferguson has his recent article, "We Are All Soviets Now." I encourage everyone to read it, about the decline in mortality in American society or because of drug usage and obesity, our diets, depression, etc. And Muslims are less prone to this. Now, as their kids assimilate, they will probably have white people problems. So they probably will, some of these. But Muslims have the ingredients for success. And along with that, you're in a community, you're making money, you build a mosque. The Valley Ranch Islamic Center, where Omar Suleiman is the imam, that mosque exists because they have a large middle class to affluent community,
benefactors,
American community who can afford. Same thing with Epic, East Plano Islamic Center, where Yasser Qadhi is imam. If you go out to the western suburbs here in St. Louis, Dawah Salam Islamic Foundation, the congregation is full of millionaires. They don't need any Saudi money or Qatari money. I mean, they have guys, they literally have people that have written $1 million checks. There's a lot of wealth. This is not the UK, where the Muslim community is a struggling working class community, or France or Belgium. This is a different scenario in the US. America, contrary to what may be taught in some of our universities, is a place where you can come. We are a melting pot, but e pluribus unum, as together we are one. Where anyone, America is not based on race. America is based on an idea, and people can come and embrace these ideas of freedom and succeed. And Muslims succeed. And that's why you have a thriving Muslim community, because Americans have always, Jews came to America in the tenements of the Lower East Side, and made their way to Westchester County and Skokie and Chesterfield, Missouri, and Southern California, et cetera. That if you follow the success sequence and you have strong family, strong culture, you succeed. What many Americans don't have, and you'll see this in Europe too, many white Americans in particular, and you could say Black Americans and Hispanics are a casualty of the normative white American culture. What they don't have is family, because the families have been broken. Yeah. Divorce, single parent houses, people not having a lot of kids, people spending the last decades of their lives dying and rotting and being abused in nursing homes. We have this total destruction of the family, which Muslims don't have now. The next generation probably will. But, that's why Muslims are successful. Same in Europe. They complain. And I do think immigration needs to be regulated. You can't have uncontrolled immigration. We need to control our borders. You have to have a sensible and reasonable immigration policy that's pro-immigration, but also within the national interest. But no one is forcing white Americans or white British or white French or white Germans
have children,
not to have kids, not to have children. No one is forcing you to be in a polycule. No one is forcing you to sit at the pub until you're 40, and then when you're 40 and have been living as a teenager for 25 years, maybe it's time to get married. No one is forcing you to pursue these lifestyles that are not in tune with classic Christianity, classic Judaism, classic Western civilizational norms. No one is forcing you to embrace these lifestyles which are destructive to your own society and your own culture. You have done that to yourself.
That's very interesting. I want to ask also your thoughts generally on the Catholic Church in America.
Yeah.
Get your perspective as an American Muslim. I'm a Catholic. I teach at a Catholic university. South Bend is a little bit of a Catholic bubble. I mean, maybe it's kind of
Yeah.
similar to East Orange, New Jersey. Actually, I want to ask you about that too for Muslims.
Yeah.
But like, Catholic Church is going through like a massive decline, like most Christian
Yeah.
denominations. I mean, I'm not totally up
Yes.
to date on the statistics, but it used to be people would say for every one person who becomes a Catholic, 6.5 people leave the Catholic Church. So, it's just wave of
Yeah.
disaffiliation. I mean, is it particularly noticeable in St. Louis? I think, it's big
Oh
Catholic
yeah.
historically.
Oh yeah.
Like, what is it
Oh
like
yeah.
as an American Muslim sort of observing what's going on with the Catholic Church in America?
Oh yeah. So you got to realize I grew up in a heavily Catholic community.
Mhm.
And my perception of Catholic kids was they were rich because they went to private school and they played soccer. I thought only rich kids played soccer. This is my childhood
While you were
understanding.
wrestling.
Yeah, I was wrestling. Yeah, and in wrestling, and I played football and baseball and boxing and stuff like that. And so St. Louis is a very Catholic city, and historically, Catholics had a lot of power in St. Louis city politics. You had to hit up all the fish fries and all the parishes. And what's happened in St. Louis is what's happened in many of our American cities is that your traditional working class families, both black and white, have left the city,
Mhm. Mhm.
and population has
Living in
declined.
subdivision somewhere in the suburbs.
Exactly. And now deep in the suburbs and exurbs. So like there's flight from the suburbs, even like further and further out. And so those parishes that were once very powerful, like St. Raymond's, the Maronite Church, and many others, St. James the Greater, Irish parish, St. Ambrose, the Italian parish, St. Stanislaus, the Polish parish, many of them have either closed or they're just a shell of their former selves.
Mhm.
And that's why the Archdiocese of St. Louis adopted All Things New, which was a program to close so many parishes and schools, because the only people moving into the city are generally white progressives in any numbers. The white population is increasing one place in the United States of America, and it's in cities. It's decreasing as a percentage of the population in suburbs. It's increasing in cities.
Interesting.
So you kind of your white progressive types
Yeah.
who statistically they don't have kids, and if they have kids, they're not religious.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they don't want to send them to Catholic school. So my niece, who just graduated from college, she was of the last class to graduate from St. James the Greater, which was a parish school that had been open for like 150 years. St. Elizabeth High School, which was open for like 150 years, closed. So we've seen so many Catholic schools and parishes closed because the city is becoming a lifestyle center for upwardly mobile, affluent, progressive-minded nuns, the
Mhm.
nuns, right? And more conservative religious people are increasingly going to the exurbs, Muslims included, And so that's kind of what's going on with religion. I've seen the decline in the Catholic Church. I do a podcast sometime with Father Augustine Weta, who I met at a protest. You can look up Father Augustine. He's an author. He's done a lot of good stuff.
Okay.
We talk about
Yeah.
this.
Terrific. We should
I
link
mean,
it.
I can look at Vatican II. I mean, it seems that the church has been in decline since Vatican II. Now, is Vatican II responsible for that, or were there other factors involved?
Yeah, so on
Vatican
that
II.
bit, if I can jump in, like
Yeah,
knowing
yeah,
Salafism, like I don't know where you
yeah.
stand right now in respect to
Yeah.
Salafism, but like Vatican II, if I were
I'm
a
post Salafi.
Salafi Muslim, I'd look at Vatican II and I'd be like, well, this is where you guys went wrong, this is where you deviated from the minhaj, or this is your bid'ah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm post Salafi, so I don't. I
Okay,
mean, I don't identify as Salafi more.
okay,
I'm I'm a Hanafi Ashari Muslim
okay.
at this point. Uh, but I think when all religions try to compete with the world or with secularism, you're going to fail every time. We see this not just with Catholics, we see this with Jews. So you look at the Orthodox Jewish population is growing in the United States,
Right, right,
as it is in Israel as a percentage of the population.
right, right.
But we have now the Reformed and conservative congregations collapsing at a rate even greater than the Catholics, far greater, because intermarriages rates are very high,
Mm-hmm.
and assimilation. They're no longer living in neighborhoods like Bernie Sanders grew up in, which were ethnic Jewish neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods largely don't exist anymore.
Right.
The Jewish neighborhoods now are religious
except for
neighborhoods, not the secular or not.
sorry to jump in, but like except for like neighborhoods like Crown Heights and Brooklyn in the more sort of ultra Orthodox neighborhoods, right? Those are still around.
No. You have religious neighborhoods,
Okay.
religious Jewish neighborhoods.
Okay.
But what people like Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer grew up in was a Jewish neighborhood. We had people religious, you had people not religious, you had the whole spectrum.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Bernie Sanders of today or Chuck Schumer of today would be growing up in suburbs.
Yeah.
And their neighbors would be Catholic.
Yeah.
You know, there might be a lot of Jews in the neighborhood, but they wouldn't constitute a majority.
Yeah.
You know, like Dennis Prager used to say, he said, I used to talk to the mailman because I wanted to know what a Gentile sounded like. You know, that was how Jewish Flatbush was of his childhood. My point is, so you have this free fall of non-Orthodox Jews, right? And what's happening? When you teach them the only thing to be a good Jew is to be a good progressive, is to be a good liberal, right? Tikkun olam. This is our religion, to make the world whole. And so they have a very vague understanding of religion. And yeah, we have some different holidays. And then, oh yeah, you know, to be a good Jew is to be a good progressive, right? And then one day they're in college and progressive politics puts them on the menu. You're now on the menu.
Although some, I mean,
yeah,
this is kind of funny. Speaking about Judaism, but some in college, you know, they discover religion, as you probably know. They hear about Chabad or something, you know, and like go back to
Chabad is like the Muslim Tablighi Jamaat, but they're a lot more organized, professional. I mean, based out of 770 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, Crown Heights. Chabad rabbi here in St. Louis for WashU students, Rabbi Hershey, really smart guy, does a lot of great work with WashU students. Yeah, so that does happen, and you get your belt to shuvah, you know, with your newly religious people. But you know, that's a fraction. That's a fraction of the population. For every one of them, you might have one with a Hezbollah flag, and you may have 8 others that just don't want anything to do with anything. You know, they're just fully assimilating. Yeah. So with the Catholic, but to the extent there is any growth, it's Chabad. Yeah. It's people telling you, your Judaism isn't Tikkun Olam. Your Judaism isn't Planned Parenthood. Your Judaism is Judaism.
Yeah,
it's Torah. It's Talmud. It's Yiddishkeit. It's Jewishness. And so the Catholic version would be the same. That's why the growth you see is from the trads.
Yeah,
the traditionalists.
Yeah,
among Catholics. The Latin Mass. And I don't know why the Pope wants to get rid of the Latin Mass, because it seems like you have young, enthusiastic families that are having a lot of Catholic kids that are attending the Latin Mass. I don't know why the Pope wants to get rid of it.
Yeah,
so, shame on you, Pope. Shame on you.
All right, 2 more questions before we wrap up. I mean, things I want to get in, so there's no clear segue, but you know, I mentioned it briefly. In your book, you speak about East Orange, New Jersey. This was totally new to me. It was really interesting. I mean, I guess Muslims generally, maybe especially African-American Muslims, it has a real symbolic importance. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, when Abu Muslima, who was a young, very talented African-American imam who graduates from Islamic University in Medina,
right,
when he comes back by the way, he was given Shahada by Imam Zaid Shakir and a brother from St. Louis, Talib Abdul Malik, who was the father of Hamza Abdul Malik, who's an Al-Azhar grad, right, Zaytuna. And Hamza Abdul Malik's father, Talib, and Hamza is one of the first Black American graduates of Al-Azhar, along with Ubaydullah Evans. So history is kind of coming full circle with this. So he established this community. They rehabbed the old armory. They did a great job rehabbing his huge armory building off of Orton Parkway in East Orange. And Muslims started moving there really from throughout the country, but particularly from New York City, parts of New Jersey, the Eastern Seaboard, you know, Virginia, it became a hub. And it became a really fascinating place to see all these young, enthusiastic Black Muslims wearing thobes, kufis, hijab, niqab, the bumper sticker, let the sunnah go forth and don't try to stop it. That was the motto. And they had T-shirts. Let the sunnah go forth. And then one time they had a 1-800. It's like 1-800 no bid'ah or something like that. They were, I mean, it was an energetic movement until they do what all Salafis movements do. Boom, they imploded. They imploded. They divided. Yeah.
All right. And then, I mean, I'd like to explore more sort of that, because your book, you know, you cover not only the rise of Salafism and the excitement and energy in the 1990s, but also, you know, what's happened since then, the decline of Salafism. So we should have episode 2
Well, you got to remember,
about that.
Salafis are not immune to greater trends. Religion is less popular for young people now. Religion is less popular for young people.
You might have read a little bit of my colleague Christian Smith's work. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's an anthropologist or sociologist here at Notre Dame. He showed in his studies, you know, he's along with young Catholics and young Protestants, he's you know, studied religious dispositions of young Muslims in America, and that's basically the takeaway. You know, no one's immune from this wave of disfiliation,
and we have fewer converts.
And
we have fewer converts because fewer people are looking for religion. And then we have a competitor being the Black Hebrew Israelites. The Black Hebrew Israelites are really strong with demographics that have historically been strong with Black Muslims. So I think there's a combination of factors.
Okay, I'd like to speak about that. Yeah, and in the prison where I did some work, there were people self-identify as Moors as well. Maybe we speak about that.
Moors,
another episode. But I can't wrap up before asking you something about MMA or boxing. I know you cover this in your journalism as well. So I don't know, just like, you know, what's exciting in the world of boxing today? Could you speak about that a little bit?
Well, unfortunately, Jonathan Brown of Georgetown turned down my invitation for a cage match. So that's off of the schedule. You know, I'm a huge boxing fan, lifelong boxing fan. Ever since really I can remember, I was a boxing fan. Grew up wrestling, loved the sport of wrestling. I got to go to the World Championships in Belgrade, Serbia in September. I go to NCAA championships where I can, Oklahoma State matches, Mizzou, etc. And I follow MMA mostly either to follow the Muslim fighters or the wrestlers. So most of the American top MMA people come from wrestling backgrounds. Okay. So wrestling is proven to be the best sport and the best background for MMA. So I follow those guys.
Like Bo Nickel. It's a stupid question from someone who doesn't know the sport at all. Is that because you basically go to the ground really quickly in these fights?
Yeah. It's going to end up in the ground. Who can control you on the ground? Who can get the takedown? Who can control you on the ground? And it's, at the end of the day, wrestlers are just the baddest men on the planet because it's just how you come up as a wrestler. You're just constantly weighing in. You constantly have matches. It's such a tough sport to succeed in. So when you get guys like Bo Nickel and Khabib and Islam and Chekhov, and these guys are just tough guys. Boxing's very tough too, but in a different kind of way, you know. Mm-hmm. And also, if you can't defend the takedown, you're cooked. Doesn't matter if you're a boxer or not. Shoot a double leg, boom. You know, what can you do on your back? So wrestling, you know, the jiu-jitsu guys will say jiu-jitsu, but facts don't lie. Wrestling is the top sport in MMA. So I encourage all young people to study combat sports. You know, you may be familiar with some of the writing that's came out in recent years about the problems with young men, with boys who are having a very difficult time in terms of education and socialization. There's been a lot of academic studies on this. And Jonathan Haidt talks about this in his book, The Anxious Generation, which I recently finished. And I think that combat sports is the best thing you can get young men involved in that would help them build their bodies, build self-confidence, discipline them, give them a fun activity, but a useful activity. my wrestling coach, the late great Charlie Sherritt Sr., used to say when we were kids, he said 20 years from now, and it's been past 20 years, he said, you'll be walking down an alley in St. Louis. He said, you're not going to have to know how to bounce a basketball, catch a football, throw a baseball. He said, but you might have to know how to wrestle to get out of that alley. So these are practical life skills. And from a Muslim standpoint, also a Sunnah, this is an activity that the Sahaba engaged in. And it's also a pushback. Post 9/11, there was this push to make Muslims non-threatening. So you get the corny Muslim comedians. You get Wajid Ali, nice guy, but very non-threatening. People like that, very non-threatening, that white liberal women could kind of identify with and think they're cute. And so they'll be allies of Muslims. And this left a whole generation of Muslim boys and young men out in the cold, that there was nothing for them in the community. So I think the greatest thing that's been given to the Muslim community in recent years, the greatest da'i is Khabib, because he got so many young Muslim men involved in wrestling and BJJ. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And boxing too. We can't discount in the African-American Muslim community, the great tradition going back to Muhammad Ali, but even more, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad and Dwight Muhammad Abdul Qawi, and even now we have J-Rock, Julian Williams out of Philadelphia, Badu Jack, and so much more. So there's also this great tradition of boxing in the Black American Muslim community, including one of my dear friends who passed away within the last couple of years, Keith Abdul Qawi here in St. Louis, who was a pillar of the local boxing community and a very serious and devout Muslim.
Thank you so much for sharing all this. I'd love to speak more both about, not just American Islam, like American society and religion generally. We should definitely do episode 2, and more about boxing. I need to be educated, and MMA. So the book, everyone, is The Rise and Fall of the Salafi Dawah in America, a memoir by Umar Lee. We're going to link to that in the description. If it's okay with you,
subscribe to Substack.
Okay, I didn't know you have a Substack. So I'll ask you for that so we can put that in the description. And you have a YouTube channel, I know. Other ways people should stay in touch, or something you want to promote before we close?
Subscribe to my Substack newsletter. It's the Umar Lee newsletter on Substack. And you can also follow me on Twitter. That's Umar Lee 3, as in Roman. Umar Lee, I, on Twitter. But I really trying to grow the Substack, because I plan to do more writing.
Awesome. Yeah, this was great. I really appreciate the chance, and hopefully it's the beginning, not the end. Thank you, Omar.
Okay, thank you.